This is the CFF Sites Week Zero show. My name's Joe DeSalvo, and we are going to go through the fantasy slate this week for you guys. It's a short and condensed slate this week. But first, let's kind of run down what's going on at the site. Mike and I still busy at work between his DFS content, between updating the preseason fantasy draft guide, the preseason player projections, and now getting into weekly player projections. There's a lot going on at the CFF site. We just created a lot of best ball leagues this year. We did some redraft leagues as well. The 4-in-1 Super Fantasy League opening still on that. We'll be promoting that hard this week. We've got about 70 owners in there right now. The goal is to get over 100 for a fifth consecutive year. And if you're watching this and not a member yet of the CFF site, get on in. The projections are up for week zero. We're going to have week one projections up as early for you as next Tuesday. So there's a lot going on. If you do come in, there's a lot of drafts still to be had. And the preseason material is updated through at least this point right now. So you'll be set for any weekend drafts that are going on. A lot of you guys that don't incorporate week zero into your leagues, but it's going to be a little bit of a different format. Mike and I'm going to welcome Mike in, and we're just going to talk through the schedule. We're going to talk fantasy spin. We're going to talk DFS impact and player props as well. May not be the usual format every week because this may be a little long for a shortened, condensed schedule. You may see us break out and do a couple of shows, something that we've talked about. I will do my weekly show with all the games every week, try to get that up for you guys on a Thursday. And then Mike and I are trying to do something in regards to player props and DFS later on in the week, if not sometime late Friday or Saturday before the games to try to give you guys an edge. But with that being said, Mike, I'm going to welcome you in here. Kind of a short slate here. We're going to go through it. We talked about what we're going to do here. Nothing really left to do unless I missed anything to kind of jump into it, right?
Yeah, week zero's here. I'm excited to finally get some games started. I was telling you earlier this week though, I have a little bit of the Sunday scaries today, just because, as you know, how much work goes into the season. So we're going to be covering everything: DFS, Prize Picks, props, as long and as well as the games. So yeah, it's
Well,
here.
you make a good point. I'd say, week zero for me is a little bit of a relief, but yet still a little bit of nerves, right? Because of everything we've done all through the summer, still not at the level of when we kind of go live with the preseason content, thinking, is everything up to date? Is everything good? It seemed like we did that 15 times before we really uploaded everything because there were so many changes back in the spring. So, but I get it, man. Week zero's here. Let's get into it, man. Let's just kind of get into the games. We'll go game by game. As I mentioned, we'll talk about our fantasy spin. We'll talk about DFS impact and player props, whether they're on DraftKings, FanDuel, Prize Picks. We'll get into that. So let's just start with Austin Peay at Western Kentucky, Mike. Obviously, Austin Reed, the quarterback there. For me, let's just kind of throw this out there. Only one FBS school, right? And for me, I just want to see if what we projected at the wide receiver spot kind of sticks and holds through this first game of the year. What about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a depth chart, right? So, we know who's starting at quarterback, obviously with Austin Reed, but very curious to see how the wide receivers shake out. We expect Kai Corley, David Davis to be 1-2. The Jerry Stearns, that combo from last year. But again, this was my concern when we did the Conference USA pod, a few months ago. We have heard next to nothing about Makai Corley. So, I want to see how this wide receiver room shakes out. So we'll see. I mean, some of the, like I wrote in the DFS article, I do kind of like Michael Matheson as a possible pivot play this week. Just for that cheaper option. Corley as the wide receiver 3 last year got 100 plus targets. So I think Matheson will step into kind of that wide receiver 3 role. But if Corley, I had him on rosters last year, and he really scored, gave you 10 to 12 points per game, and not much else. So do we? Is he full? Is he going to be Jared Stearns, or maybe somebody like Matheson steps up? So, like you said, how that wide receiver room shakes out is kind of what we're focused on this week.
Yeah, I think so too. And when you're just talking about building a lineup, what's Matheson's price? Because I overlooked that. Do you have that by any chance?
Yeah, he's 5,600.
Yeah, and
Who's
what
2K
is
cheaper?
so if there's a little uncertainty, what about maybe taking a stab with a guy like Dalvin Smith who got some run in the spring, who's only 3,500? I mean, that's just a name that I wrote down just because this is one of those matchups or one of those games where, like you said, we don't have a depth chart right now. And so do you really want to take a chance on throwing darts, or do you want to go with some more proven things on the depth charts that at least we've gotten through this week? For me, that's really where I'm going to be kind of struggling on where I want to go with some of these roster builds.
Yeah, I would lean towards Matheson over Dalvin Smith. I know Matheson's, 2,100 more in terms of pricing, but like I mentioned earlier, Corley was that third guy. I think typically the two slot guys are the either like the first and third, kind of target hogs in that offense. So I would lean the second slot guy over somebody like Dalvin Smith, despite the prices. But then, I kind of noted it, and we've talked about this earlier when discussing Western Kentucky. Is Joshua Simon's that wild card player for me? He's lit. Earlier this week, he was listed with that red flag on DraftKings, but I've seen videos. He should be good to go, I believe, this week. And if you remember last year against a lesser opponent, we caught three passes, 2 touchdowns in that opener. So while I kind of poo-pooed Simon just because of the tight end utilization in this scheme, I think he's that wild card player that might go under owned and could break out.
Well, let's just address the elephant in the room with Austin Reed. I don't want to move on without addressing him because he's probably going to be one of the popular picks at quarterback this week, don't you think?
Maybe. I've seen varying opinions on that. I'm probably going to be, I don't even know if I want to say overweight on it, but I'm going to have a lot of Reed shares in my lineups just because of that upside factor. Do we think he's going to be Bailey Zappi? The likeliest odds of that happening are no. But this is still one of, an offense that averaged 50 passing attempts per game last year. And I think the upside is substantially higher if he hits this week than the other quarterbacks available to us. I think he is like the only quarterback that has slate breaking potential. So I will take chances with that in my lineups.
Good stuff. Let's go. Let's jump the pond, Mike, and go over to Ireland, where Nebraska and Northwestern are going to meet in a Big Ten opener over there overseas in Ireland, right? From a fantasy perspective here, anything particularly stand out? DFS, player props?
Yeah, I mean, it sucks for me because as you know, I got heavy late last year into the player props. And of course, 2 of the games that are available on DraftKings or FanDuel are in the state or have teams within the state of Illinois. And so per their regulations, I cannot bet them. And of course, they had already a hammer opportunity in Ramir Johnson being listed at, I think he started at 67.5 rushing yards, which again, he's not going to be utilized as a full-time running back this year. That's going to be Anthony Grant as a starter, and they're going to mix in some rotation guys in that backfield, Gabe Ervin, maybe Jacques Gant. So I wanted a piece of that prop, and hopefully, we posted it in the Discord. Hopefully some of our subscribers got on it. But, other than that, I think just kind of, again, it's similar to Western Kentucky, just seeing this offense, right? Because we got a new offensive coordinator in Mark Whipple. How's Trey Palmer going to assimilate to this offensive scheme? How's Casey Thompson going to look in the scheme where he's expected to pass more than he probably did at Texas last year, and where he's definitely going to pass more than what Adrian Martinez did last year. So what are your thoughts? Because you're the resident Nebraska fan.
Yeah, here's where I thought. First of all, the Ramir Johnson definitely under on the Russian. That was one of the ones that stuck out to me when the props were released. As far as DFS goes, I'm probably a pass right now. When it comes to fantasy, I like Casey Thompson this year, but for me, if I've got a little bit of roster depth, single quarterback league, I'm probably going to pass on this. I'd probably like to take a look at him. I don't think, even though I'm not, Northwestern could be a tough play, first live look at that offense. And Trey Palmer, I'm on board with him. I think that's a player that I would just go ahead and start this week and just kind of take a wait and see look with most of the Nebraska offense. And quite honestly, if I had to go with somebody on the Northwestern side too, the offense, the history over there, Evan Hull probably is the play. But you and I both, at least I do, still have some reservations about that backfield right now with Cam Porter coming back. I mean, do we see something where Hall's the guy between the 20s and Porter comes into the red zone? So for me, too many questions in this game to take too many chances on from a fantasy DFS, point of view.
Agreed. I'm not going to have much DFS exposure. Props were very juicy, to say the least. Putting Ryan Helinski out there I got him at 195 and a half passing yards, which, I'll do some, we kind of hinted at it in our Discord. I'll be doing some live stream with props when they get released on Prize Picks, I believe Tuesday. And I'll kind of go over my process. And the Ryan Helinski prop at 195 and a half is those types of props that I look for first, right? First is to look for those mistakes. And it's not, it's 195 and a half is an okay number for a Northwestern quarterback. Of course, I bet the under, but we don't have a depth chart yet. So we don't know for sure if Ryan Helinski is going to be the full-time QB1. The name's escaping me of the backup, but I know it is a quarterback competition right now, and that's a kind of situation where you see Ryan Helinski on the board and you hammer the under because you potentially could see two quarterbacks there. So that one was, and he's dropped from 195 and a half to 157 and a half within 12 hours. So that was a good one. And then Evan Hull came out at 45 and a half rushing yards to start. And essentially that's all Northwestern does is run the football. And if you look at our projections, CFF site projections, we had Hull at 77 rushing yards. Huge discrepancy there between 77 and 45 and a half. So that was another smash play at the over there.
Yep. Well, then let's get into the next matchup. We'll go more of the, we'll downgrade here in competition. Nevada at New Mexico State. Most of that Nevada team's gone now at Colorado State. At least a lot of the good pieces, head coach, quarterbacks, receivers, playing at New Mexico State. Who we have? Kill is at New Mexico State, leading the charge again, right? So a difference probably in offensive philosophy this year as well for the Aggies. So from a fantasy perspective on this game, I know, just speaking for myself, this is a game where Tawa, the running back for Nevada, really stands out for me, Mike. And really, other than that, probably more so of a pass for me right now, just even all around, right? But from a fantasy perspective, Tawa, the running back over at Nevada, for me is the play. What about yourself?
You don't have any New Mexico State plays in CFF?
Well, I mean, is Jamani Jones going to be worth anything at running? Look, there are some options there. We feel like we have a beat on the depth chart. We feel like we may know what to expect from the offense, but how's the production going to be? And that's where I'm a little hesitant right now. Yeah,
I think I just wrote this up. Our DFS article for Saturday night will be out on the site in a few hours. But Jamani Jones is an interesting one because they listed him at the top of the depth chart. And I'm speaking from a DFS standpoint. They listed him top of the depth chart. I know it's an or situation. He was on that top line, but he's min priced on DraftKings at 3K. So This is an offense under Jerry Kill that was run heavy in his previous stops in Minnesota and NIU. And then the offensive coordinator, Timothy Beck, ran it 60% of the time at Pittsburgh State. So, there's a lot of turnover at Nevada, excuse me. Maybe we see this running game get going a little bit for New Mexico State. I think they bring back 4 offensive linemen who logged at least 300 snaps last year. So they got some experience along the offensive line. You got Jones at 3K, Monty Watkins, the TCU transfer at 4,100. So those are a couple interesting pieces for me on the New Mexico State side. Just quickly hitting on Nevada for me. I could just want to see what this offensive system looks like because we got that first time play caller, Derek Sage, as the new offensive coordinator. So, first time play caller, we really don't have a lot to kind of go on with what that offense is going to look like. 2 interesting additional pieces for me along with Tawa is Cooper Schultz, a tight end. Sounds like they're going to use him a little bit like Greg Dulcich at UCLA. The offensive coordinator came over from UCLA and was their tight ends coach. So I'd assume he'd like to get that position involved. And then Jamal Bell. I know he's kind of pricey on DraftKings at 6,200, but last year in the bowl game, he had 7 receptions, touchdown on 9 targets. So I think he's going to be the clear alpha in this passing game. So just a couple of names on the Nevada side that I'm looking at.
Yeah, I think from a player prop standpoint, the ones that really stood out to me, Mike, just with a lot of the uncertainties, is that we do know what we do have in Toa Tawa, right? So I know the prop on him was 70.5 rushing yards, and there was even a 0.5 touchdowns. I do like him to score, and I like him to go over that 70.5 mark. That was 2 of the player props that really kind of stuck out to me with this matchup against New Mexico State, because like you mentioned, if this was Nevada's offense if this was last year, we'd be talking about Nevada scoring probably 50 points on New Mexico State, right? We're not talking like that now, but you still have to expect that they're probably going to be able to run the ball and move the ball against what is probably going to be one of the, bottom defenses in the FBS this year.
Yeah, 8.5-point favorites last time I checked. So, if they get ahead by a touchdown or 2, even could probably see them run the ball with Tawa. I would just one caution. I do like the over. We had projected 86 rushing yards for Tawa this week, so I do like the over on his prop as well. All 5 starters need to be replaced along the offensive line for Nevada. So just one piece of hesitancy there. But, our projections have them 16.
Yeah, but it's not like they're playing San Diego State is my point, though, right?
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're favorites by a touchdown or more. So, I think they should be able to run the ball.
Sounds good. Well, look, another Mountain West matchup seems a little juicy. Too good to be true. UNLV at home playing Idaho State. Had this been a year ago, we'd be, drooling from a college fantasy standpoint on Charles Williams, the running back. A little bit of a question mark going into the 2022 season. Now we have Aiden Robbins pegged as RB1 for UNLV, but how much stock are we really putting in him right now? That's the good thing about week 0, Mike, is that some leagues don't start to week 1. So for some of you guys that were able to kind of take stabs on some of these players that play in week 0 and have a chance to really sit back and watch, and if it's not what you thought, you always get rid of them and hit the waiver wire before the season starts. But I'm kind of interested to see how that UNLV offense looks at running back. Obviously, we've got some, Kyle Williams, Ricky White, some receiving options there at UNLV. What are your thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, there's interest all around, in my opinion. Robbins from a DFS standpoint and a college fantasy standpoint, we talked about it in the guide, how in our Mountain West stats to know column that head coach Marcus Arroyo really, when he's got a running back, like a certified starting running back, he'll typically feed him, dating back to his Oregon days, 46.4% volume share, which is top 10 nationally over the last 40 years, he'll give to his running back one. So if Robbins is the guy, I mean, he's going to have massive ownership
No doubt.
this week in DFS being at 3,300. But even from a CFF standpoint, I mean, you see what Charles Williams did last year. I think they should be better throwing the ball so they don't have to lean on the running game as much as they did a year ago. But you know, when Arroyo's got a guy, he rides him, and so this performance, I think, from Robbins this week will have an impact on the rest of the college fantasy season.
Yep. Well, let's go over to Wyoming. We're good. I mean, DFS, player props, anything else that we want to touch on? Because, like you mentioned, Robbins is pretty cheap in this matchup, so there might be some high ownership there.
I'd like to see what happens. I mean, I want to see what happens with the passing game. It was dreadful last year. But they really do have some pieces at the wide receiver position this year.
Yeah, Ricky White was the one that I kind of took note on. I think he might be on DraftKings at 5,100. He was one that this is one of those matchups where you feel like UNLV is going to be able to do something. And, that was one of the ones that stuck out to me just from a pricing standpoint on potential.
Yeah. I mean, don't you think that, facing Idaho State, I don't know what the spread is. I don't have it up right now, but this is a good chance to work on some things, right, against the FCS opponent. And I would think they'd want to work on their passing game, figure out who's the guy between Brumfield and Harrison Bailey. And, from all accounts, they got some weapons this year at wide receiver. You mentioned White. Kyle Williams comes back this year. And this JUCO, Jeffrey Weimer, has been making waves all since spring. Bigger targets, caught 17 touchdowns last year at junior college level. So, he's been getting plenty of praise from the coaching staff. So they got weapons. They need to figure out the quarterback. So, again, another interesting storyline to watch is Doug Brumfield versus Harrison Bailey in this matchup.
Another one of those, matchups that's going to have some interest, at least from fantasy perspective. Wyoming going to Illinois, right? Where the running backs figure to be very popular plays. Titus Fenn over at Wyoming. You've got Chase Brown over at Illinois, right? So there is a lot of probably going to be a lot of guys starting those two running backs this week. And from a fantasy perspective, other than that, maybe there'll be some guys taking a chance on Isaiah Williams. We've got Lunny coming in. He was the OC at UTSA last year, Mike. So there could be a tendency to throw the ball a bit more than what Illinois did last year. But for me, those are the three names that probably jump out at me. Anything else really sticking out to you in this matchup?
Not really. The running backs are the centerpiece. Chase Brown, Titus Swen. I'd even consider Josh McCray in that conversation too, especially if Illinois blows them out, because I think Josh McCray is going to be a top 10, top 15 running back in college fantasy in 2023 once Chase Brown graduates. But so I like playing. I would even be okay playing both Chase Brown and Josh McCray in a lineup. I think they'll both have successful weeks. Swen's interesting just because all the turnover at Wyoming has people cautious on how the offense is going to look against Illinois this week. But I mean, who the hell else do they have to give the ball? The running back 2 is out this week, as Craig Bowles said. I feel like 20 carries is an absolute lock for him this week. Assuming Illinois doesn't run the ball, or have possession of the football for 3/4 of the game. But I took the over. I bought the dip on Titus Swen. Started, I think, at 72.5. And his rushing prop dropped all the way down to 59. And that's just too low. I mean, we have him projected at close to 100 rushing yards this week. And I think that alludes to the fact that, he's going to get 20 plus carries almost guaranteed this week.
Yeah, that was one that stuck out to me. Titus Fenn at 67.5. I mean, we know the history of that offense, whether or not it's a copy of itself in the last couple of years remains to be seen, but that offense is still going to be heavily invested in the running game. So Titus Fenn sticks out to me. at 67.5. I mean, that could be a game that really does stay close, and you could be looking at 20 plus carries for at that particular point. He only needs to average 3.3 yards per carry to go over that number. And I think Isaiah Williams, Mike, I think his yardage on Prize Picks was 45.5. I like the over on him too. That was another one of the player props that I really liked from this matchup. Like we mentioned, Barry Lunny coming over from UTSA. There may be did I get that right?
No, my bulldog is snoring in the background.
I heard him and I was like, you know what's going to happen? People are going to think that I'm breathing really heavy on here. And I was like, Mike, somebody's breathing on this thing. And I knew it wasn't you. I didn't know where it was coming from.
I'm trying to kick him right now. I'm just gonna wake him
No,
up.
man. We're good. But that's the one that really, for me, I think we could see Illinois throw the ball a little bit more. And I do like the over on Isaiah Williams at 45.5. To me, that one looks really good too.
Yeah, that's the other one I was going to hit on. I like his overs actually on pretty much all three fronts with yards, receptions, and then fantasy points too.
Yeah,
because don't forget, as a former quarterback, he's utilized in the Wildcat plenty. So I think he'll get a couple carries potentially. May even throw a pass in the red zone. But then, just reading practice reports, I mean, I know that Illinois doesn't throw the ball a lot, but he is the guy for Illinois, right? They have a couple other pieces, Casey Washington, Brian Hightower, but he is the guy in that passing game. So 10 targets, I think, is a very reasonable outcome for Williams. And so we'll see what he does with that. But yeah, I like him. I kind of like him as a DFS play because at 7,300, I feel like people are going to be like, he's kind of expensive. Illinois doesn't throw the ball that much. But again, I think he's the alpha in that room. So I do think he might be a nice under-owned a play in like a large GPP.
Gotcha. Let's go to Connecticut, Utah State, Mike, where, we've been kind of, you've got quarterback Logan Bonner coming back from an injury. There seem to be some whispers about whether or not he might play in this game. We know, look, Utah State, ton of turnover at receiver. You got Brian Cobbs, you got Justin McGriff back. Kyle Van Leeuwen was projected, he's on the depth chart at that wide receiver 3 spot. You still have a little playmaker in Nine Davis that could get run as a wide receiver 4. This has potential to be one of those games where Utah State could open it up quite a bit. You've got Calvin Tyler at running back, tons of fantasy options for Utah State. It's almost like you just got to make sure you're picking the right one. Over at UConn, tons of questions. I mean, what stood out to us, Robert Burns was starting running back that on the depth chart. We know that they lost Cam Ross. Probably make somebody like Keelan Marion, the top wide receiver, play there. From a fantasy perspective, I'm off of UConn. I'm on Utah State. I almost think everyone that I just named, at least, Cobbs, McGriff, Bonner if he plays, and Tyler as well. Those are probably all must starts for people. What are you seeing on your end? What are you thinking? And is there, what about a DFS or a player prop perspective right here?
Not much from the UConn standpoint. You get 16.5 implied team total, so 2 touchdowns at best. Keelan Marion does interest me from, I think every standpoint in terms of maybe college fantasy. And somewhat at a DFS standpoint, because if you look back, offensive coordinator Nick Charlton at his previous stops, his wide receiver 1 the last 2 years averaged around 20 fantasy points per game. They run a balanced offense, but it seems like he feeds his wide receiver 1, and now that Cam Ross is out, I think Keelan Marion is that guy for them. So he's a bit interesting at 4,600 from a DFS perspective. I'm kind of off UConn for the most part outside of that. Utah State, I think, is one of the most interesting teams, I think, for us to watch this weekend. Wide receiver room feels up in the air at this point. I know everybody's got their opinions on who, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, or even wide receiver 3 is. So similar to like Western Kentucky, that wide receiver room, how it shakes out is of utmost importance, I think, for us from a DFS and college fantasy standpoint. Logan Bonner, I don't know. Thanks to CU Tiger, Shane in our Discord, for posting that podcast link. It said the host of the podcast said he's got a source that said Bonner might be limited or may not even play the full game. I mean, we scour the internet, scour the message boards, look at the Utah State practice videos that they post on their Twitter, and Bonner's tossing the ball around. He's got a brace on his knee, but he's still tossing the ball around to his receivers in pads. So just a situation to monitor, right?
Well, here's what I would say. I don't see where he would just play part of this game and not all of it. I would think that if he plays until they don't need him anymore, and then they take him out. Because let's be honest, there's no sense of holding him out. If you're going to hold him out for precautionary reasons, you're holding him out for 2 games because they travel to Alabama next week. And so if he's not going to play a full game this week, he's sure to hell not going to play a full game against Alabama. So if that rumor might be true, you could be looking at 2 games without Logan Bonner. Let's kind of hope that that's kind of hearsay, and because I think if he starts, you're good to go. I mean, I can't see where they would start him with just the intention to play him a quarter and a half just to get him playing time. The guy's he's been around forever. He doesn't need to play in this matchup and just play 2 quarters. I think if he does, he's going to play as much as they need him. So
he'll play until a blowout.
Yeah, exactly. Talk about play until we blow them out. Let's go to the next matchup, Mike, where Duquesne travels down to Florida State. One of those matchups where I wish this wasn't a week 0 and Florida State had this on their week 1 plus schedule because of the shares that I have in Jordan Travers. But from a fantasy standpoint, is there anywhere else to look right now other than Jordan Travers, or, are you kind of, fading everything else on the FSU roster right now?
Definitely fading the receivers. I know Jordan Travis made improvements last year, but they really spread the ball around amongst a bunch of receivers, and they added to that room this year with Johnny Wilson and Micah Pittman. So don't have any interest in the receivers. Running back room's interesting, with Trey Benson and Treshaun Ward. Benson, I know, has gotten a lot of hype in fall camp, but I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I remember last year with Jashaun Corbin, like once Jordan Travis entered the starting lineup full time, I know Jashaun Corbin's rushing volume went down a few notches, right? And I think it was averaging like 13 carries a game. So now you got 2 guys in that Florida State backfield that are capable of shouldering the load. So combine that with Jordan Travis, I don't see a ton of fantasy value for the running backs over the course of the season. Of course, if you need a placeholder, then maybe you can sub one in. But I think it's Jordan Travis and everybody else.
Yeah, Mike, real quick, because I'm with you. I don't really have much when it comes to the FSU play, other than I'm just going to kind of keeping my fingers crossed for Jordan Travers. One thing I forgot to mention, I'm going to back up real quick to Utah State real quick, because I did have Justin McGriff as one of my prop plays at over 55.5. I thought that number was attractive. I kind of hit the rewind button to go back to that matchup, but that was one for me that kind of stuck out a little bit. I feel like he's one of those guys, say 4 or 5 catches, we may be able to assume, and it only takes 1 big catch to kind of pop that number. So I wanted to kind of back up there as we were kind of closing out the FSU game.
Yeah, I would say that I agree. I got a lot of Justin McGriff props. I would just say to that point that it is very key to stay in tune with the Discord, because I jumped on it in the 47.5 range, I think. So a nice, a solid difference there. But I think it just speaks to the fact that it is absolutely key to jump on the props as early as possible to get that best value. And but yeah, I like Justin McGriff's a deep threat that can break one. I got over on fantasy points, and I got over on receptions because again, we don't know exactly. We have Brian Cobb's projected wide receiver one, but we don't know exactly who's going to be that guy for them this year. So
Yeah, that's a great point, Mike. I'm glad you said that because it gives me a chance to kind of bring that up in the middle of the show here as we kind of wind down the last couple of matchups. When you come in as an All-American or a Heisman member, you get a link to join the CFF Sites Discord. And what Mike mentioned is that's exactly it. We've got team channels built in there, injury channels. You've got DFS dedicated channels. We've got prop bet channels, just gambling, football gambling props channels in general, roster discussions. If you're still looking for a leagues, they've got league recruitment channels. And like Mike said, on Saturdays, that's the place where you're going to want to be. There is news and nuggets coming in from around the country. A lot of the followers in there are posting things as well. Last year, we had over 700 members in the Discord. We're approaching that number again. So a lot of resources at the CFF site, and you guys, the followers, the subscribers, the members are part of that. And so thank you guys. But for all of you that are not in there, man, for college fantasy football, that is a must have, particularly when you're trying to hit those player props, some of those prop bets. Like you said, Mike, that discussion goes on sometimes Mondays, Tuesdays. And by the time a guy, sits down and digs into some of those props at the end of the week, sometimes you've got 5-6 yard line movements by the time the end of the week, and you've kind of missed some line value there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I'll be doing some live streams right when the player props drop, or at least attempt to, so we can help you jump on those lines as soon as they come out.
Well, we got 4 games left. Charlotte at Florida Atlantic. This one for me is a fun matchup. I'm going to look forward to watching this one, just with all of the kind of the names that could be wrapped up to this, from fantasy lineups, from Chris Reynolds to DuBose and Tucker, the wide receivers over at Charlotte. You've got N'Kosi Perry, quarterback FAU. You've got Johnny Ford, who had a good year last year. And interesting enough, Larry McCammon tops the depth chart to open up the year. LeJonte Wester was a decent fantasy option at one point last year. For those of you guys that don't have week 0 incorporated into your league, this is going to be a real fun one to watch, to see just at least how quick out of the gate some of those guys that you drafted start out this year. From a fantasy standpoint, DFS standpoint, or props, Mike, anything stand out to you, or anything that you want to add on top of what I just kind of mentioned there?
No, I agree. This is a very interesting matchup, just from every standpoint: CFF, DFS, even props. A lot in this game here. I'll start with Charlotte. I think me and you would agree, we're big on Charlotte this year, just for the amount of returning production that they bring back on the offensive side of the ball. You got an experienced quarterback in Chris Reynolds, 2 talented running backs in Chadrick Bird and Calvin Camp. They really dig into each other's workload. So from that standpoint, they're not that intriguing, but talented runners in their own right for Conference USA standards. But for Charlotte, it's the receiving core, and I think you would agree. Grant DuBose is our projected wide receiver one. It's funny how you just notice these advanced stats of, like, man, his ADOT, his average depth of target, is significantly higher than Victor Tucker's. 2.34 yards per route run, also substantially higher than Tucker. I think that big playability is why he kind of inserted himself as the wide receiver one over an experienced option like Tucker. But DuBose and Tucker, very solid options. They got a third option, Elijah Spencer, I think you like as well. Very talented. Another big play threat, was actually tied with DuBose with 6 receiving touchdowns. So, I mean, there's not a ton of weaknesses, on the Charlotte offense. A lot of returning experience. So we'll be interested to see them.
Well, the reason why we like Charlotte, we talked about this in the preseason, is because we don't think their defense is going to be that great either, right? And so you've got a really seasoned offense with potential to be in some 30-30 games. That's what we really like about Charlotte. And, when I look at this game from a couple of angles other than fantasy, when I look at it from DFS and I look at it from a prop standpoint, we talked about it at the onset. There could be a lot of money, on Austin Reed. There could be a lot on Jordan Travis as well. For me, the intriguing option might be a quarterback like N'Kosi Perry in this matchup because of what we just talked about and the potential of where this game could go. Perry's got dual threat ability. I think last I looked on DraftKings, he was at 7,100. And one of the player props that I did like was his over 9.5 yards rushing, because I really don't feel like he's going to be under pressure if he's throwing the ball. So I don't think there's a lot of risk in losing yardage as a passer. And I kind of liked his 9.5 over on the 9.5 rushing on the prize picks as well for N'Kosi Perry.
Yeah, I agree with that, and we talked about it in the guide how new offensive coordinator Brent Dearman does like to get his quarterbacks on the move a little bit more than the previous regime. So yeah, I do like that play a lot, and there was a lot, and honestly with the player prop on the FAU side, you know, you get Johnny Ford, 77.5, I think was his rushing prop. You know, listed second on the depth chart. Do we know why? I mean, we would agree he's the best running back on the roster, but you know, is that kind of due to his spring suspension because of academics? You know, maybe he's just not the starter for the first play, and then he comes out on the second play and runs and is the guy for the rest of the game. But you know, I mean, that's another one that I kind of look for when I'm looking at my, you know, taking a look at the props initially. It's like, okay, here we got a backup, you know, quote unquote backup, listed at 77.5. You know, we've seen indications that it's going to be a committee approach with Larry McCammon and Marvin Scott Jr. So that's one that you just kind of look at like, oh, man, if this guy's not the starter, I'm gonna go with the under, and our projections stayed as much as well.
But you know, that's interesting because that's something that you and I talk about, and I'm big on this. I'm not huge on just following the depth chart because of it's the depth chart because of the reasons that you stated, right? Sometimes you'll get a guy, maybe a running back that's been there 4 or 5 years, shown exceptional leadership. He'll open up the season on that week 0, week 1 depth chart as running back 1, but really he probably gets the first carry and may only get 5 or 6, and then all of a sudden he's overtaken. We may get to that point quite a bit in some of the games we're going to be discussing just over the first, 2 weeks here. But I don't like to put a lot of stock in a depth chart. However, the depth chart can be our friend when it comes to prop bets in week 0 in week 1, because there's a lot that's not known. And if you kind of go in with that frame of mind, you may be able to find some real value in some of the lines that you're going to get.
Bulldog story again. Sorry.
No, it's all good. All right. So I know everyone's probably anxious to get to this one, Mike. Let's go to Florida A&M at North Carolina, right? Where, you had a quarterback battle, spring, summer. Drake May gets the call over Jacoby Criswell. Probably this is a matchup where I could see both guys playing. I went on record in the preseason, I think even in the guide myself or wherever. I know some shows where I just, give me Josh Downs. And for me, the UNC offense was a little too fluid for my liking. So it was sort of a pass for me. Curious to see how that North Carolina backfield shakes out, because that has potential. And, let's see what happens behind Downs at the wide receiver spot. Do we see somebody like Nesbitt have a big year, who I know you're high on this year? You've got the youngster Green there as well. So there are some playmakers on offense, but UNC, we're going into this weekend. And for me, I feel it's a little, I hate to use the word risky, because you've got guys like Amari and Hampton, right? And Petaway, that are 3K at running back. So it's hard to say that it's risky with those guys when they're so cheap. But from a fantasy football standpoint, it is a little risky right now if you have a choice of using them for week 0 or week 1 between Florida A&M and Appalachian State in week 1, even though Appalachian State is going to be a much more difficult opponent than Florida A&M. If we at least have clarity in the depth chart, then that kind of helps ease a little bit of the pain and heartache that you might get by trying to take a stab on one of these guys in week 0.
Yeah. This is why I'm very glad that North Carolina is a week 0 team, because you're facing Florida A&M, so you're not going to get all the clarity that we need, but I feel like we're going to get some, right? Drake May's quarterback. I thought it was going to be Criswell, but I still believe that we're going to see both. Mac Brown essentially said that. And, if Drake May doesn't get the offense moving against Florida A&M for, 2 straight series, I wouldn't be surprised to see him get the hook already with Criswell, because Mac Brown said it was that close. But it is Florida A&M, and we could see Drake May light it up. But either way, I feel like we're going to get some clarity at the quarterback position in this week. Same with the running back. I think we're absolutely going to see all three. DJ Jones is a complete fade for me at 6,400 on DraftKings.
And who's number one on the North Carolina depth chart?
DJ Jones. Yeah, that's why we have the DFS articles to give you clarity as opposed to the depth charts alone. So we note that in our DFS article that'll come out in a few hours. But you listen to Mac Brown's press conferences or just even the coaching quotes, not even just Mac Brown, and it's the freshmen just stand out. They get mentioned almost immediately, even when British Brooks was around. So I'm on Omarion Hampton this week. I'd say play George Pettaway too at 3K. They're both going to get substantial run this week. And again, you're not going to have to pay much of a price there. And then, this is more for, I guess it's CFF and DFS, but, you mentioned Josh Downs, you're kind of fading the rest of the North Carolina roster, but this is, I think, a big game for from a CFF standpoint, especially with guys like Andre Green Jr. and a guy that I've heavily invested in is Bryson Nesbitt. I know I have double-digit shares of him in our CFF leagues. He's been priced too. Get some comparisons to Eric Ebron, just the type of athlete that he is. He's going to be one of their top options in the red zone when the Tar Heels get there. He's been priced. He's going to flex out to slot receiver. He might even flex outside. So they're going to use him in a bunch of ways. So he's not your conventional tight end. And then the star freshman, Andre Green Jr., They need somebody besides Josh Downs. And he's now, with the Antoine Green injury, he's now our projected wide receiver 2 there. So again, he's been priced too on DK. So a lot of intriguing storylines for North Carolina in this game at multiple positions.
Let's go over to North Texas and UTEP, Mike. Second to last game on the slate. This one is like a 7-8 o'clock kickoff here. Austin Aune keeping that starting job. Grant Gunnell came in. He held him off. If this season plays out anything like last year, that may not mean much. It may just be based on performance. North Texas put a lot of stock in what carried them through was that running game last year. By all accounts, it seems like Attaway is back and Attaway is healthy, which is good news for the North Texas offense. UTEP, remember we had, we've looking at new receivers there. This year, we had to transfer Cowing, go over to Arizona. So, maybe, I know I'm high on, and we were a little high on Tyron Smith in that UTEP offense, as long as he lands in that similar role this year. From a fantasy perspective, and the double back system at UTEP, right? I mean, they got one guy listed at the top, one guy listed as RB2, but man, last year these guys split carries through the entire season. Mike, what's your take on this matchup, UTEP and North Texas? Anything that you're seeing jumps out at you?
Yeah, I'm interested. So, spoiler, I for my top play on DFS for North Texas, I put NA because I'm not interested in anybody because we have a projected depth chart, but we have zero clarity at running back. We have zero clarity at wide receiver. Wide receiver is going to be an absolute crapshoot, I think. And another team like UNC that I'm glad that we have on the week 0 slate, because maybe we get some clarity there. I do not think Roderick Burns is going to be a target hog like he was a year ago, because they didn't have anybody else besides Roderick Burns, right? So you get Jair Shorter back, you get Tommy Bush back, you get the 2 transfers, Jay Macklin and Latrell. Did I write that right? Latrell Neville, is that his name? Nebraska transfer. But so you got 5 to 6 guys that are getting involved in wide receiver. So I want to see how that shakes out. I'm not playing them in DFS. Running backs, I'm okay with playing both. Oscar Attaway and Akaika Ragsdale. Um, it should be again one of the best running games in the conference. You know, you get 4 starters back along the offensive line. We spoke about how good that offensive line was last year. I think North Texas had the 5th most fantasy points scored from the running backs in the entire country last year. So I like Attaway and Ragsdale. Funnily enough, on DK, Isaiah Johnson is projected as or not projected. He's the highest salaried running back, and he's 3rd string at best. So that's a guy to fade. But you know, I'm kind of off the North Texas situation for this week. And then just flipping over quick to the Utah or the UTEP side, it's the receivers for me. Split backfield, no interest in Gavin Hardison. We think Tyron Smith is going to be the wide receiver 1. I would be willing to put money on that, but of course, another guy that I have no idea how to say his name, Kelly. I'm going to say just Kelly A. He was a JUCO transfer. He's getting some pub as a possible complement to Tyron Smith. He reportedly runs a 4.4 40-yard dash. And he's going to step into that Justin Garrett role from last year, right?
Yeah.
50 receptions for Garrett, 89 targets. That could be a guy at 4,100 on DraftKings that can help your lineup. But it's really receivers are bust for me with UTEP.
Yep. Let's go to the final matchup, Mike. Vanderbilt SEC matchup against Mountain West team Hawaii, right? Vanderbilt going out west. Who doesn't like to go down to the island, particularly in a week 0 matchup? Here we go, Vanderbilt. One of the times we may feature them on a show this year because there's so few games. From a fantasy perspective, I have to be honest with you, even though Vanderbilt is playing Hawaii, that, you know, from even Ray Davis at running back, not much interest from me. There might be some, you know, could there be 1 or 2 players from this game in one of my roster builds? Yeah, sure. You know, but another, you mentioned like, hey man, North Carolina, glad this is a week 0 team. North Texas, glad this is a week 0 team. I think we could probably say something similar about Hawaii with this. You know, we want a little clarity at quarterback. We know Parson at running back. We know that, you know, the top receivers, we probably have those 2 pegged with Bowens and Pinnock, right? But there's still, you know, questions about how's this hybrid offense going to look? How's it going to work with Shager at quarterback if he opens up as a starter? Parsons for me, Bowens from a fantasy standpoint are probably starters this week, and everybody else is sort of a wait and see for me right now. But what's your take on this game?
My whole weekend mood is dependent on Zion Bowens hitting from a DFS perspective and from mostly a prop perspective, because his numbers, and I get it because these sites don't do the research that we do, but you know, his props just came in way too low. 3 receptions. He was in the 40s, I think 49 and a half for his receiving yards, 47 and a half. One of those 2, I get them mixed up now. He was around that number on both DraftKings and Prize Picks, and our numbers say that he'll skyrocket over that. I think we had 5 receptions for 77 yards as his projected totals for this week. So, you know, Bowens, I really need to hit this week. Want to see, we have him projected as wide receiver 1, want him to solidify himself in that role if he can. You know, Dedrick Parson, probably the best offensive player on Hawaii. So, you know, not a ton to discuss there. Quarterback is interesting though, too, because, you know, they say it's still a competition there. Shager's been the projected starter since the spring. So it'll be interesting to see if he succeeds or not, because if he succeeds, I think we have our guy for the entirety of the season. And this is an offense that obviously we're going to have interest in because it's 42 passing attempts per game on average, right? So this is a high volume passing attack. So, you know, definitely some interest in Hawaii from all perspectives. Vandy, yeah, I mean, this is going to be the one game probably, or one of a few games that we have real interest in Bandy. I think Mike Wright's a decent option. He's a dual threat quarterback. I think he rushed for like 30 plus yards in 4 or 5 games last year. Ray Davis at running back. They have a deep running back room, so they could split carries there. And then wide receiver should be interesting too, because they got Will Shepard and then the freshman Jaden McCollum, who we both like. So some interesting pieces, and I think they'll have a pretty good week from a fantasy standpoint. But this is probably the only time, like you said, that we're going to discuss.
Is there a showdown on this game listed? Because to me, that's what the fun in this one might be, playing in one of those showdowns for this matchup, because there are so many options available to us. I'm kind of curious, because a couple that stood out to me is, you and I talked a little bit about how Jaden McGowan, the freshman, kind of came in and, one of the fastest players on the team. Depth chart opened. He's sitting there at the wide receiver 3 spot. And I think he opened up on DraftKings at $3K, right? So that's a little cheap option. And I believe we had James Phillips listed as a running back. And I didn't check this out, Mike, but he's starting at wide receiver now. He's listed as one of the wide receiver 3 after Bowens and Pinocchio. Is he listed at running back on there, or is he listed as a receiver in there?
Yeah, he's listed as a receiver. I just wrote this up. And I said it in the article. Don't quote me on this, but I think that's a slot back, not like more probably utility, kind of like Calvin Turner. But I'm not expecting Calvin Turner like production, obviously. But I think it's a slot back. But yeah, it's a little fuzzy there with Phillips.
Well, that's what, remember that we were talking about when Shoemaker came over. It was kind of like the hybrid. They were trying to figure out how to kind of incorporate these offenses. And so I'm kind of curious to see what Hawaii looks like more than anything else. It was just something that jumped out at me because Phillips is 3,900. And I was just, that's one of those, like McGowan, one of those cheap options where I could see maybe somebody playing him in a showdown.
Or Jordan Murphy. That's your boy.
Who's that?
Tight end, Jordan Murphy.
I forgot to even mention him. That's right. Who I think could be a red zone target. Who, yeah, you're right. I do have him in a couple of best ball leagues as well. So
they do have a showdown. Just FYI, there is a showdown on that game.
There is. Yeah. Awesome. That'll be fun. It gives me something to stay up late and have some fun with. But Mike, that's going to do it, man. Look, you mentioned the Discord. A lot of stuff going on. This is probably one of the busier weeks for both you and I, from a standpoint of trying to catch all of the late season, preseason news that comes out and trying to get all of the week 1 content uploaded. We've done something for the first 2. We'll do something for the first 2 weeks that we hope not to spoil you guys by, but just to kind of give you a heads up. We did have the projections up early this week, and they will, for the most part, probably be up no later than Tuesday next week. That will be more of a late Wednesday, early Thursday occurrence when the season gets going, and we've got a lot to really process and digest. But Mike, that's going to do it for Week 0 show. Probably went a little longer than what we anticipated, but some good stuff there. Really enjoyed talking Week 0, and it's finally fun to get back into talking some football on a weekly basis, and we can try to see, to get an idea of what plays out when we have a chance to kind of digest all of the preseason content and see what, transpires and see how our picks do.
We've been doing the best balls, the CFF best balls since late February. Yeah. So we've been deep into this for a while now, and it's always exciting to see how our selections and our predictions play out. And it's here.
But that's going to do it, man. But that's what makes the site so great. For all of you guys that are members, have already come in and subscribed, thank you. The CFF site's the most comprehensive college fantasy football resource that you're going to have, from preseason to in-season to covering the DFS to covering the props bets. We are your one-stop shop for college fantasy football. Thank you guys for making the CFF site what it is today. Continue to get bigger and better each and every year. And this is another season ready to go. So Mike, it's kickoff season. That's going to do it for Week 0, for the Week 0 show. So for my partner, Mike Bainbridge, my name's Joe DeSalvo. That's going to do it. Week 0. Let's kick it off. We'll see you guys next week.